Welcome back to Dan's Messy Garage. This is going to be part 3 of me rebuilding a Ford 302 engine in my garage. Today I'm going to be installing the crankshaft that I polished in part 2, and maybe even the pistons and rods and rings and bearings. I don't know yet. But for now, we're going to start with putting in the new bearings, dropping in the crank with a new rear main oil seal, and torquing it down. Let's get started. Getting ready to put the crank in, and you got to use assembly lube when you do this. I got some black Moly graphite assembly lube, some red stringy slimy assembly lube. I'm going to be using the black one today. It doesn't really matter, you just want something in there to protect the engine while it sits until you start it up. For bearings, I got Moly Cleveite 77. The mains are MS 590P, rods CB634A. Now this is what is known as a standard rebuild. That means it's the standard bore, standard size crank bearings. So the bores are 4 inches, they're not bored over. I'm using the stock pistons over again. Yeah, you can go ahead and hate me for that, but you guys can spend the money that you want your way. And on this one, I'm going to use the stock bore. Just put new standard rings in it because it's in good shape. The crank is in good shape, so it's not turned. These are standard size bearings. So standard rebuild, garage style. Get you guys set up here and I'll see if I can shove these in time-lapse style. What I'm going to be doing, I have my torque wrench set here, 25. The mains are torqued to a final 70 foot-pounds. I'm starting out 25. I'm going to go 25, turn it up to 50, torque them, go up to 70, torque them. Then I'm going to do a check, make sure I get a double click on each one of them at 70. Alright, so let me start you up time-lapse here. And I guess I can show you the old bearings I pulled out of there. They're in good shape, and they're standard bearings. They're stamped that they were made in March of '93, so this could be a 94 or 95 engine, which is just fine by me. And enough yakking, get to work, idiot. Okay, it's the next day actually. This is Thursday, August 1st. I was gonna put the crank in there, and I realized I mentioned that I bought that rear seal. I thought it came in a gasket kit, but it wasn't in the gasket kit, so I had to go out to O'Reilly and buy one. So I have it. This is the old one. Here's the new one. But what I'm going to show you is how you check bearing clearance between the crank, main journals, and the bearings. So what I'm going to do is install the bearings in the block, in the caps. I'm going to drop, no, I'm not going to do that. There's 2 ways to do it. One way, you drop the crank in with a piece of plastic gauge on it, torque down the cap, and then read the squish on the plastic gauge. I'm going to do it the other way, which is you measure the inside diameter of the bearing, measure the outside diameter of the crank, and the difference is your clearance. Now I have what's called a dial bore gauge, and I have my chronometer. This is saying, spin this around my hand here, that the crank journals are 2.249 to 2.25. I've been checking them. Whoops, that's not a crank. That was a rod. See, these are all the same. So 2250 or 49.5 or something. I'm not going to get too critical on this. And I'll show you how that's done. I have to set you up while I install the bearings and the caps and tighten them down somewhat. Explain what I did here. I put the upper and lower bearings in number 1, number 3, and number 5. You know, the one at the front of the block, back of the block, in the middle. I'm only going to check those 3, and if they come out to be the same, I'm going to assume those other 2 are the same. They should be. I mean, it's a standard bore. I mean, it's all standard build. The crank measures the same. The crank's in good shape. The bearings all came in the same box. They should all have the same clearance. I've never seen anything different when the crank's in good shape. So let me get my dial bore gauge out and measure the inside diameter of those bearing surfaces. Let's see if I can do that. See, I'm using the hood of my Monarch as a workbench here. That's okay. It's planning to paint this car sometime. The cam I'm going to put in there is a stock 50 HO cam. You know, it's like from a Mustang GT. It's a Ford cam hydraulic roller. It's nothing crazy, but it's a little better than the cam that came in that F-150. And I'm also going to put on some GT40 heads. These are the 3-bar heads, not 4-bar. The 4-bar are a GT40P. They require special exhaust manifolds, and you can have trouble with the spark plug boots. These are the GT40s. Those are a couple steps up from the E7 TE heads that were on here. Plus the heads that were on here weren't in good shape. So physically, they weren't in good shape. So anyways, I tend to yak too much. Let me get my dial bore gauge and get going. Okay, I gotta get a smaller end here. These are, see, this dial bore gauge can be used on different size bores, and there's a little pin that fits in there. And then it has some spacers on it. I'm going to try it without the spacers first. And if this doesn't fit in there, then I'll have to get a smaller pin. Set these spacers on my hood. Hope they don't roll away, because those are specialty type things. And nope, still too long. Okay, so let me get a shorter pin here. Don't go anywhere. I'll be right back. Alright, I got it. Took me a while to get my fat fingers in there to get it, but I got it. That other pin was probably from when I built the Cleveland engine, my 68 Mustang. That's got bigger bearings than Windsor's. Alright, so this one is a tad short, so I gotta get those little spacers that I just pulled off there and put them on this. All the joys of not being prepared. See, if I was a professional YouTuber prepared to do this stuff, I'd have had all this ready, but no, you're dealing with an idiot here working in his garage, so you got to expect this unpreparedness. All right, let's try that. You gotta be kidding me. I put 2 spacers on it, and of course, 2 spacers is too much. I'm gonna take one out of there. Which one do I take out? Because I got a thicker one and a thin one. I'm gonna try taking the thin one out. As you recall, Murphy lives in my garage, so I'm probably gonna need that thin spacer instead of this. What I'm doing is I'm rocking this back and forth to find the closest dimension. Then I'm going to set the gauge at 0. This fell off the bearing. And then I'll stick it in the micrometer and see where we're at. I'll get that later. Alright, that looks like it's 0. Retest this one. Yeah. Let me check the third one here. Double check. Don't know why, but my phone stopped recording. I was saying, I'm going to double check everything here. And I'm coming up with about a 0.5 thousandths difference. And I want to check and verify that that is true, and it is. Okay. This one. Now a half a thou difference isn't concerning to me. Okay, this is set. So now what I'm going to do is come over here. Set that down carefully. I took and measured this journal accurately, all of them, all the mains. And I come up with 2.2493. I wrote that down on my pad of paper. So what I'm going to do, after I give you guys seasickness here, I'm going to put the micrometer carefully in my vise. I don't want to squish it. I'm going to take this without touching the dial. I'm going to put this in between the micrometer that's at 2.2493. Get everything centered and read my gauge. And I have 2.5 thousandths clearance. Perfect. We got a great main bearing clearance. So now I can put the engine together. I got the main caps off, all the bearings are in. I wiped off the crank to make sure that there's no grit or crap on there where the main bearings go. And I need to put assembly lube on those bearings, on this oil seal area. In fact, let me get that oil seal. And then I need to drop the crank in there, put all the caps on, and torque them. So, it's right here on my workbench. All right. So I'm going to put some assembly lube inside the seal on the edges that rub on the crank. You don't want to start an engine up with dry rubber on steel. It'll just burn it up and you'll have a leak. So, grease that up a little bit. Put some looby-dooby on here. Try to do this without knocking the crank on the floor. All right. This goes on. Fighting me. Why is that fighting me? It should just slide right on. Like that. Okay. That feels good. It spins. I'm checking to make sure that it's not folded over. That looks perfect. And this side, perfect. Okay. So I'm going to lube up the bearings. My assembly lube tube has a hole in the bottom, so I'm squeezing it out the hole in the bottom rather than squeezing it out the top here. I discovered that hole in the bottom by mistake one day when I was squeezing it out the top. I had big globs of grease all over the front of me without even knowing it. And I ended up spreading that all over the garage and car and everywhere else until I figured out what was going on. So, back to this. The center bearing is also a thrust bearing. It aligns the crank in the block back and forth. And it limits how far, the crank can slide back and forth. So when you loop that up, you gotta loop up the sides of this center bearing so they ride on the sides of the crankshaft. In fact, I'll smear a little bit on the crankshaft here too. I'm almost done on the block. Okay, now I'm going to put this on my workbench. Grab the crank, and drop it in position. Make sure that there's nothing in the block stopping that oil seal from going where it belongs. All right. It all looks good. Crank spins around nice. Oil seal's in the right spot. So now I gotta lube up all the, whoops, I got it. Stay there, guys, stay. I'll get that. All right, we got it. You wipe the dirt off it. What I was starting to say, I gotta lube up the bearings that are in the caps. Now these caps are numbered 1 through 5. And they all have an arrow pointing toward the front of the block. See if I can show you that. Yeah, light's not quite picking it up, but there is a number 1 and an arrow here. And the arrows, here, I'll try this way. See that? Maybe not. Number 1 arrow pointing forward. So when I put that on, I'm gonna make sure the arrows are all pointing forward. First I gotta lube it up. I think I'm gonna have to make the hole in that tube a little bigger. It's hard to squeeze this, especially with slippery hands. Okay. Arrow it forward. Set that down. Now these caps also fit in a slot in the block, and the cap is wider than that slot. So you got to kind of knock that cap down into, it's called a register. The register in the block holds the caps. So what I like to do is get it in there, tighten the bolts, kind of pulls it into position. I'll whack it with a hammer, and then torque the first round of torquage, be 25 foot-pounds. And I'll beat on them with a hammer again, make sure that they're down in there. Then go to 50 foot-pounds. Finish it off with 70 foot-pounds and double check. All right. Now the same procedure I went through with the crank clearance, going to go through with the bearing clearance on the rods. I don't know if I'm going to bother showing you all that. It's all the same procedure. Just do it over and over. I'm only going to check a couple of them, not all 8. Again, this engine was in good shape. And the crank's not turned. Put the same pistons and rods right back in it. Just new bearings, new rings. Now, if I was building a serious engine or one for drag racing, I'd be going through a lot more, what would you call it? A lot more steps. You know, I'd get the block dipped, machined, bored, honed, decked, square decked, get the crank turned, everything checked, balance. You know, I'd go through a lot for a high RPM race engine. This is not a high RPM race engine. It's going to be a stock build, loafing along in that Monarch that you guys are sitting on top of. All right, so let me get something to wipe goo off my hands. Good old microfiber towel. Thank you, Chris and Lori, for buying me a whole bag of microfiber towels. I've been using them a lot. They're great. Okay, so I'm just gonna snug these up with this 1/4 inch ratchet. It's not gonna tighten them, don't get excited. Battery just died. How about that? You think I would be prepared or something? I'm half prepared. I got another battery that's already charged, so. That's better. Okay, I'm going to get a hammer and beat on all the caps, get them down into that block register. Go to the first round torquage. I'm going to torque it at 25. That right way. Okay, you probably can't hear that click from where you are. But I can hear it and feel it clicking here. It's like that electric thing got them at least 25. None of them are moving, so I'm sure that the caps are down in the register. And I'm going to go up to 50 foot-pounds. 50. See if it still spins. Yep, it still moves. All right. 70 foot-pounds. Guess it wouldn't hurt. Love taps. hit it. All right. Quick. I notice they're all turning about the same amount before the click. That's all great. That's what you want. You want them all evenly torqued. They do have oil on the threads of the bolts and under the heads of the bolt gets the cap. Alright, I'm going to double check them here. Double click on each. Okay. Get these. Oh, that was only one click. All right, so I'm confident the crank is torqued, it moves. It's stiff because of the thick bearing stuff I have in there. If I used oil, that would have spin it a lot easier, but I used that black, gooey, sticky stuff. There's another important measurement. It's I was talking about the center bearing, how it holds the crank in position. I'm going to measure how far it moves. Got a dial indicator on the crank snout. It's indicating 0. I pried the crank to the back of the block, 4 thousandths. Back to 0, 4, 0, 4. So I have 4 thousandths movement on the crank, back and forth. Perfect. It's going to be great for this engine. This concludes part 3 of a garage build on a Ford 302 engine. Stay tuned for part 4, where I'll be putting in the camshaft and some rings on the pistons and installing the pistons. See you then. Bye.